All right, well, let's go ahead and get started then. Welcome to our spa retailer webinar on ESOPs. We've been doing this series of succession planning webinars. We've covered family businesses in our last two, and for the next three, we will be talking about employee stock ownership plans, ESOPs. And with me, I have Jim Van Fleet and Mark Stevens, both of whom have converted their hot tub companies to ESOPs. Jim got into the industry in 1993. He's got an MBA in finance, and he converted mainly tubs to an ESOP, or announced the conversion in December of 2016. And Mainly Tubs now has 7 stores across 4 states. So welcome to the, I almost said welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the webinar, Jim.
Thanks, Megan. Nice to be here.
And then Mark, he opened Georgia Spa Company back in 2004. The company's grown to 7 locations across the Atlanta metro. And last year, Mark converted Georgia Spa to an ESOP. And so both Jim and Mark both serve on their company's boards now. But Mark, thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
So when you start talking about ESOPs and stock and vested, like my mind kind of goes blank. And so I was hoping that for this first webinar on ESOPs, we could just cover the basics of what an ESOP is. Maybe take away some of that angst people feel about just all of the terms and and acronyms that are involved with an ESOP. So let's just start off by saying, like, what is an ESOP?
So Jim, I'll take it. I used to lean on Jim a lot when I was looking and thinking about ways to exit the business or sell the business or do different strategies. Jim would talk about ESOPs with huge passion. My eyes would glaze over when I started hearing about warrants and stock ownership and all these things that just is not natural to a small business owner, right? You come from the corporate side, yeah, probably you've dealt with some of these same things, but for a small business owner, there's a lot of terminology there that I think confuses a lot of people. They get frustrated that they don't understand it to the level they wanted to. Through talking to Jim and some other people, and eventually just diving in and going to a couple of ESOP conferences, I got with the right people and the right baby step my way through it. So I would recommend that to anybody. Like, don't think you have to know everything about ESOPs, but just start diving into them slowly. The National ESOP Association is a great resource for free information and free resources and those kind of things. So, that's where I started. I just started slowly walking through it, and then every time I talked to Jim, I would understand a little bit more because I had done my research. But I didn't let Jim know at the time that I didn't understand what he was talking about. I just shook my head and agreed with him. But now, it took a while to get to that level where we could have the same lingo conversation, because it is a whole different world of ownership and understanding the dynamics of it. So.
Yeah, Jim definitely blazed the trail for all of the ESOPs in the hot tub industry to follow. But Jim, how did you start your journey of an ESOP? You came from more of a finance background, so did you have
I did as far as buying the business is concerned, but I sort of like Mark had a bit of an entrepreneurial instinct, and so my instinct was to grow and to try and be better all the time. And so naturally, as the company grew, it finally grew to a size that an ESOP was a possibility. But more basic, an ESOP is basically a sale of your company to a trust that represents the employees. And so it is not unlike any other kind of business transaction in which the owner or current ownership group, however that works, negotiates with a trustee representative of the employees to see whether they can find common ground for there to be a sale of the company. What's important for me, and I know it was for Mark, was that the most basic instinct that I had was, if I can get a reasonable value for the engine that I built, then the best possible scenario is to have the people who helped build that engine share in the ownership. And so that was kind of a motivating factor for me, because I thought, my ego gets away from me sometimes, but I thought I had built something really cool and really good, and that these people ought to be able to share in the value of that. And so in 1978, the Congress passed the part of the ERISA law, which made ESOPs a tax advantageous way also for employees to own companies.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm not sure I've ever talked to anybody about sort of what the tax implications of an ESOP are, but we'll save that. We'll go more in depth on that one in a later webinar. But so let me ask both of you, did you both not have a family member or somebody that you saw as a potential successor inside your family or company that you thought would be the next owner?
For myself, I mean, I spoke to both my children and asked them, they're in their mid-20s, what their future looked like and what they wanted to do. And not that they didn't show an interest, but I didn't think they were at the level at that point where they needed to be in the future to run the company. We like Jim, we had an excellent management team in place to run the company, and so it's succession down to a child or somebody inside the family was not really what I was looking for.
Okay.
So
yeah,
I have two children actually, and both of them, Becca, when she was a high school kid, she recruited the delivery crews. These were high school kids who were paid $15 to be on the corner of a hot tub after school, and so she was involved in the business for only that way. She is an artist, and so she wasn't really interested, although she has the entrepreneurial instincts. My son, on the other hand, was involved in the business for a year and a half or so. He helped create our website, first website, and did our first SEO. And he always said that his father made decisions like a glacier, and he wanted to make decisions more quickly. And so he had ideas on to how the business should be run, and they were slightly opposed to mine. And so our relationship blossomed when he went out on his own.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's good to ask, because I think when you're sitting back and trying to figure out, what do I want my succession plan to be? I think sometimes people try to make family work when it's not the best option for the company. And so I just think it's interesting that both of you took a look at that and said it's not the right thing for our family or for the business, and looked at other pathways.
Yeah, and me personally, I looked at several other routes of selling or public companies coming in and buying us and stuff like that. It just wasn't the right fit for us. And I think there's some considerations you have to look at when you're looking at that kind of decision. Is what do you need in life immediately? What do you need long term? And then what's your exit runway? Do you have 5 years, 10 years? Do you need it now, or do you need it, your payout over a number of years? How do you make all that look? And I think the more flexible you are and the more you have planned at an earlier age, the better options you have for that. Jim, you can speak to that a little bit, but for me, that was my consideration of, I didn't need it now. I needed it over the next, 10 to 15 years. And I was fine with the way the ESOP was structured for my exit runway. So.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions is what does converting to an ESOP mean for the current business owner? I mean, what does that runway look like when you convert to an ESOP?
I think it largely depends on how you decide to structure the transaction, and some of that may be dictated by the financial institution that you choose. I interviewed 9 banks in the hope that they would be willing to support whatever the down payment for the purchase price would be, which would go from the trust to me. And then I had to decide, like perhaps as Mark did, as to whether or not I was prepared to finance the balance, and if so, what the transaction would look like. And so I think that is very much a personal thing, and we'd done very well, and so I was able to consider financing that portion, which the bank wasn't, and I didn't have a short porch for a timeline because I wasn't ready to retire. And the bank said, well, we'll give you a higher percentage if you work, if you're a contract employee for a period of time. And so that led to ultimately to a 10-year transactional payout. Happily, things went better and it went faster, but those things you have to look at carefully. I might add that I was lucky enough to find in Maine a fellow who was the CEO of an ESOP, and he probably gave me a week or 2 weeks over the span of 2 years of free consulting. And so whether it was what, and I felt as obligated to share that with other people in our industry. And so I would, at the Gemini meetings with Mark, I would share it, or when I ultimately saw other owners, I would offer free advice. And so as we were sitting in North Dakota, as you have a seminar somewhere or a webinar, I felt as if it's important for me to go forth and help those people in our industry free of charge. So I made that offer, I think, when you recorded me a few years back, Megan, and I continue that offer. I'm still involved in Mainly Tubbs. They know how to get me. I still chair the board as Mark does his, and I hold that offer out to anybody who's in our industry who's interested in this transaction type. A wonderful way to reward employees.
Yeah, and I'll add to that a little bit. I think you asked about what your role is once you sell the business. What becomes of you.
Yeah.
I will say, as the trustees and valuation companies look at your business to do all the background work, they want to know what your participation is going to be. They want to know how you're going to be involved. They're really going to take a hard look at your management team and want to understand, are you adding a bunch of new pieces, right now, or you have the people in place and they've been there for a while to run the company? And that's very, very important. Don't think you're going to sell and convert your company to an ESOP without the right management team in place, because they look at that hard. They want to know that you're still going to participate at some level. They expect you to be less participation than you were prior to the sale, but they want to know, are you going to be here? Are you going to be able to answer questions? Are you here to help with day-to-day things if it arises? Are you going to chair the board? How does that look? How does your board makeup look, and what participation is the board going to play in running the company? I know for our situation, we're a very high level board. We look at the finances and budgets and all the other stuff on a monthly basis and make tweaks and things. And the executive team has to come and they come for a lot of ask. There's a lot of ask and a lot of discussion before things are changed. So, we're still, Jim and I both are so active in our companies. We're just not active in the day-to-day operations of our companies.
Yeah.
I guess would be the best
so
way
if
to
you're
put it.
looking for a quick and fast exit, an ESOP would not be the way to go, for sure.
No, I think if your plan is just to sell and walk away, no, an ESOP would not be and I don't think, I don't think a trustee evaluation company would even consider it if you were going to do that.
Yeah. What
Is
does
my take, Jim.
Well, I guess, you kind of talked about a lot of the stakeholders who are involved in making this happen. And I guess that's maybe my next question is, um, I mean, this is who does need to be involved in converting to an ESOP? It's not something that you as the business owner can just do. Like there are governing bodies that need to look at this, correct?
Yeah, first of all, Mark did exactly what I did, and that is went to the national. Write this down, everybody. The National Center for Employee Ownership (NCEO) is a San Francisco-based membership organization. It might have cost $100 to join, and they have a wealth of materials to help you better understand. They run conferences and seminars, an annual meeting that is hugely educational. And it is there that you meet all of the professional practitioners who play various roles in an ESOP transaction, both getting towards the transaction as well as the ongoing. But even before those professionals, one of the things that I think any company is well served by doing is I set up an internal board of directors. It was basically a phantom board, but all of my key management would once a month and then on a quarterly basis, we would report to ourselves. We would call ourselves the board, and we would simulate board meetings as if we were owned by somebody else or there was a whole nother board. And so we had key performance indices that we would identify. These are largely financial, but marketing and other gauges by which we would monitor the business. And that process was hugely important to the valuation people. The people who came in to start looking at our company saw that we were already operating as kind of a board of directors. And we were already had in place the various analytical tools necessary to understand how we were doing and be able to have a financial model that we could project into the future with confidence.
Yeah.
So, Mark, I think you did something not unlike that.
Yeah, I started the process probably now 6 years ago. But my whole thing was working with a management coach was just to figure out how to run the business as an absentee owner. That was my whole gist of where this started. And we started talking about pieces that needed to be in place and people we need to hire over time and stuff like that. It evolved into how do we sell the business and then how do we, ESOP the business. So we started putting those people into place, the executive team, and we started doing, monthly management reports, and just like, we should have been doing for years, but we started doing monthly management reports and quarterly meetings and stuff like this. We didn't create a phantom board, but that's a great idea. And then at some point after going to some conferences, I think the first key person you got to really go out and interview and find and have a great relationship is an ESOP advisor. You got to find somebody in the industry that's a registered advisor. That's what they do for a living. And I think the owner and him or her have to click. It has to be their partner, because this is the person that's going to baby step you through the process. This is the person that's going to help you build a forecast model that's quite extensive and quite huge, and it's going to be tested and all these things. But this is the person that'll get you there. And this is also the person you may get a month or two into the process and realize, hey, this isn't for me, or this isn't, we're not, I hate to say it to a bunch of small business owners, but our books aren't as clean as they should be, or we need some back end work before we really dive into this. And maybe we need to wait a year or two. So I would say once you are comfortable with thinking this is an avenue for you, to go out and find an advisor. If it costs you anything for the first, couple of months, probably not. They're gonna work with you to a certain point, and then they're gonna have a proposal for you of what the cost is going to be. But that's probably the most important first piece of a professional in the ESOP realm.
Well, and you bring up a good point, Mark, that it's before you start any process for your succession plan, no matter what it is, having your house in order is the first step for any business. Like whether you're converting to an ESOP or selling to a family member or an outside buyer or private equity. I mean, if you don't have, if you don't have your books in order, if you don't have your people in place, you're just not going to get the value out of your company that you want. I mean, that's really what it boils down to. Maybe you can make a transaction happen, but you probably can't maximize what you'll get out of it if you don't have those things.
Well, not only that, but it's gonna be stress tested. It's gonna be looked at, examined. You're gonna have people inside your books, and they're gonna know pretty quickly when there's it's not all above board, or you're doing things not that small business owners don't do, but just that need to change, right? And there's also other government constraints and stuff like that. As you get into the ESOP, the way it's tested every year, the way it's audited every year. I mean, I would say an ESOP company out there that's running their business, the way they get examined, the levels of examination are a much more financially sound company just from an outsider looking in. And I don't know, Jim, you're a finance guy, so you probably did everything perfect from the beginning. I'm going to say I didn't. So, but we were at a great point when we were ready to ESOP to make that transition. So,
but somebody said to me, Mark, your company is more valuable if you can continue to show the compounded annual growth rate, and you can show on your handicap index that you've played more rounds of golf every year. Your company is more valuable. Well, that's what sat with me. But the NCEO, let me, not to belabor this too much, but the National Center for Employee Ownership, this San Francisco-based outfit, has employees. First of all, their conference is where I first saw, and I knew Excel, so I knew how to model, but I didn't know how the ESOP world modeled their transactional and value analyses. But I learned that at this conference, and I came away with a template of a spreadsheet that allowed me to plug our numbers into this. And then I got free advice. Corey Rosen, who was at the time the executive director of the NCEO, and then Lauren, I'm trying to remember his last name, who's now the executive director. They have on their staff, and they will help advise you. They looked at my spreadsheets. They gave me a bunch of free advice as I asked the question, is this the kind of company that would qualify? And that was before I started paying consultants and paying the professionals for this. So it's like a lot of things. It depends on how far you want to dig in and how much you want to do yourself. There are some incredible practitioners out there, and now ESOP is a popular transactional mode for baby boomers to exit their businesses on a ramp as opposed to a cliff. And so if you like that idea, and for me, it's my third child, so I wanted to stay involved, and I thought it would keep me young. Yeah. Go figure, right?
Well, I was curious how you would even figure out if your business is a good fit for an ESOP. So Jim, you went to the conference and got your spreadsheet in order and kind of went that route. But are there just some key benchmarks that you could look at to know, is this even an option for us before you even do that much work, I guess?
I would say, there's a couple of things thrown out there. Obviously you want to have a management team that can run the company when you're not there. That's key number one thing. If you went on vacation for a month tomorrow, can your company still run without you being on the phone for 8 hours a day trying to run the company? So I think that's number one. There are some top line revenue numbers I've heard. I don't know if they're factual, but the company's got to do a certain amount to be able to sustain what it costs a year. It's not that much what the annual cost is to have an ESOP in place. but there are some costs, and obviously there's transaction costs when you sell the company, just like there would be transaction costs if you listed the company on a with a broker, but they're a lot less. I will say an ESOP amount is much less than what a broker would cost you. But I've heard 10 million. If you're not at the $10 million threshold top line revenue, then it probably isn't worth your time. There's other options available to you, and there's some other ways to ESOP, but you can do partial ESOPs, you can do full ESOPs. So there's other avenues inside the ESOP realm that may not be a full-on 100% ESOP sell either. There are companies that'll sell 25% of their company will be ESOP, and then when that's paid off or down the road, they'll ESOP another 25%, or they'll ESOP 50%. So there's ways to structure the whole deal that's has different ways to run it. So if you were still in the business, wanted to run the business, maybe you ESOP 49% of the business, you maintain 50% of the business, and then you do the other part down the road. So there's different ways to structure it.
Okay. Are there roadblocks too? I mean, are there things that where it's like, no, it's just not a good, wouldn't make sense for this business?
Profitability, I think you got to have a profitable company, because most of the valuation, there are very few comparable transactions, and our transactions are all private, so they're not available in the valuation world for people to look at. And so people want to have some sense of what value they're getting also. In my case, I'm on record. You've got some old videos of me. We were somewhere between 7.5 and 8 million in revenue. This was 2015 or so. But we had very close to $1 million payroll. And the number of people, the amount of the payroll is another critical piece. I would say in today's day, it's probably, it could be no less than 800,000 and might be closer to 1.5 million. But these are numbers that even the folks like the NCEO folks could help you understand whether you're of a magnitude to be interesting to the trustees and the trustee valuation folks.
Yeah, I would also say if your business isn't profitable, it doesn't have a good EBITDA, it doesn't matter how you try to sell it, you're probably not going to get much for it anyway, whether you sell it on the open market or ESOP it. ESOP is just a different avenue for that deal structure. And I would say that, you got to start there. You got to be honest. You got to be open and honest with yourself. You got to open your books and look at them and go, am I profitable? Do I have good EBITDA? And, where can I be as a multiple of EBITDA to try to make this deal work? There's different scenarios. If you sell it, if a public company comes in and buy it, if a investment company comes in and buy it, if you ESOP it, there's different multiples of that EBITDA. But I would say if you're just looking to exit because you want to get out, you need to take a hard look at your business and say, hey, am I running a profitable company? Because people don't want to come buy a job. They want to come buy something that's making money and they can go play golf every day like Jim does.
So can you walk us through, I mean, this is ESOP Basics. So in the most kind of top level way that you can, just what it looks like to convert to an ESOP, kind of what are those basic steps that happen? Maybe there is no, maybe it's too complicated to even give a rundown on. I don't know.
Well, Mark had it right. You need a quarterback. You need an experienced quarterback. And I found a woman at these conferences who was from northern New England and who was a practiced veteran. She was an attorney, but she was a quarterback. And so once I knew that my company qualified, I hired her as my quarterback. And it was with she that we identified the valuation company, and she walked me through the various steps necessary. And she offered advice on what she'd been seeing for what rates banks were offering, what proportions banks. So a lot of important information, transactional information, came as a result of having an experienced quarterback who'd been through lots of other ESOP purchase and sales.
Yeah, and they're gonna help put together the team, right? So there's, I mean, like you said, there's so many players. You're gonna have a trustee company, evaluation company, a third party administrator, of course, attorneys got to be involved. So you're gonna have attorneys. You're gonna have, I know I'm forgetting some there.
No, you got them. My team was a quarterback who happened to be an ESOP attorney, and I interviewed the trustee candidates, and together the quarterback and I made the choices to who the trustee was going to be that would represent the employees, knowing that we were going to negotiate with that person. But both Mark and I had an opportunity to interview those trustees, right, and make sure that they understood what our company was, and they had, you know, there's sort of the chemistry of doing business together with professionals. Those criteria are different for each of us. And then we had our own valuation firm. We had somebody who took our numbers and prepared what they felt the value of our company was. So with our quarterback and our valuation team, we were prepared to negotiate with the trustee and the trustee's valuation firm. And they had a lawyer as well. So, you know, and then there's a bank and the bank's lawyers. So there are a lot of moving parts and there are a lot of players. But Mark hit it right on the money earlier, because the percentage of what you pay of the transaction price, it varies, but we paid somewhere around 2% of the purchase price for all the combination of all of these professionals who helped get us to the finish line. That's far less than a business broker or an M&A deal or any of the other avenues that you might have for exit. So that was for me. And then the Department of Labor and the ERISA law says that the trustee is supposed to protect the employees from the owner taking advantage of the employee group and getting too high a price. And so, and of course, on the other side of the transaction is that you can't sell it for too little. So there are some countervailing forces that work together to come to a transaction that would typically meet the Department of Labor's criteria, because they watch, and they're watching my transaction, even though it was at the end of 2016, they're watching Mark's, they're watching every transaction to ensure over time that the owner didn't take advantage of the employees.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the other part of that, the quarterback, the ESOP advisor is going to bring those people into the mix when it's necessary. I kept asking my advisor, okay, are we ready to do this? Are we ready to do that? And he'd be like, no, that's another 3 weeks. That's another month. That'll be next month. And they're going to bring all those people in on the right timeline. So you're not getting ahead of yourself. You're just working through bits and pieces of it, and then more bits and pieces. So you're not trying to get overwhelmed, and you've got the right players. They do hundreds of these transactions. They know what they're doing. They know the players. ESOP community is a very small community, so they know who the right valuation companies are, the lenders that are very ESOP favorable. They know all those players, so that they can bring those to bear when they need to.
So we did have a question from our audience. Are there pros and cons to whether you're an S Corp or a C Corp when you're converting to an ESOP?
Now you're diving back into the tax advantage that you said we don't talk about.
Well, that's okay. We can still give answer in an overview way.
Sure. There are I was an S Corp. I'll just tell you my experience. I was an S Corp, and I was offered, as part of this whole due diligence, to convert to a C Corp. And if I was to convert to a C Corp, the successor company would be paying corporate income taxes for 5 years, as C Corps do, but that I could take the capital gains associated with the transaction invest all those proceeds into domestic stocks and avoid capital gains altogether, as long as you kept in that investment. And that in itself was a rigor, and there's scrutiny by the IRS and I think the Department of Labor. So that's an avenue in which the seller could avoid capital gains. It does have the obligation for the company to become a C Corp and hence pay taxes. I viewed it in a slightly different way. I said, well, capital gains are 20%. They have never been that's a historic low point, and that's just a matter of fact. And my sale was an installment sale, so it was over time. And so the installment sale and capital gains, by staying an S Corp after the transaction, also allowed the company not to have federal tax liability. And with no federal tax liability, I felt the company had a much greater chance of success, because it had to pay its interest, had to pay its debt service, and it had to pay its principal obligations over time, and would be in a much better position to do so, and at least keep up the tenets of the loan documents. But as it turns out, that was right. Without having a tax obligation, we were able to pay down the banks and the rest of the transactions debts faster. And I incurred a 20% installment sale tax obligation, which I thought was worth it. That was my evaluation.
Yeah, and we were exactly the same. We were an S Corp. We had looked at the advantages of moving to a C Corp. There were some waiting periods, there was some other stuff. But I look at it as Jim did. If the company's debt service can be better with no federal income tax, then the advantage to the company is also an advantage to me. Because if the company is sound and solid and making its payments, then I don't have to worry about it in the future, because mine's an installment purchase also. It just gave me better solitude that the company was able to service its debts and be in a better position, making me in a better position to get paid and get what I needed out of the sale.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So when you were first talking, Jim, I was thinking, okay, well, a C Corp is more beneficial to an owner and an S Corp is more beneficial to the company. But it looks like both of you looked at it as what's best for the company is really what ends up being best for me too.
Yes, that's the way I look at
it. I absolutely believe that, and I different strokes for different folks, but most of the people I know who have done ESOPs find that maintenance of their S Corp status. In fact, some people convert from C Corp to S Corp prior to making the ESOP transaction for this very reason.
Okay. Okay. We haven't really talked about what an ESOP conversion means for the employees, and we kind of have a little bit, but not in a whole lot of specifics. So, I mean, it's not like you wake up one day as an employee owner of your company and you're suddenly, making more money and like splitting all the revenue. Like that's not how this works. It's not like a windfall out of the gate for employees.
Well, no, it's not a windfall in the tangible sense. It is, however, employees gain stock in the company that theoretically grows over time with no investment. They have no dollar investment requirement in order to get this stock. And in our case, I think a really important tactical decision, and I've heard other companies who have used a short cycle in which all the stock for 100% transaction, where all the stock goes out to most of the players who are there in a short period of time. And what that means is that the new people in a growing company have to wait for the older people to get out before stock is available. So a very specific recommendation that I would make is a 20 or a 25 years, in our case, 25 years, over which 100% of the stock is given to the employees. And that means that there is a long period of time in which some of that stock comes back from people who retire or people who have left. And so there is plenty of stock for the new people coming into a growing company to be able to say, oh, I'm an owner. And you know, you can, here we are 7 or 8 years into our transaction now, and that new people every year come in. They have to work a year in order to get vested, to get into the plan itself, and a longer period of time for vesting. But that said, they're getting stock pretty quickly if they make their employment criteria and they wish to stay.
Yeah, one couple of things. Jim's thrown out the ERISA lingo a couple of times, but you know, an ESOP is a qualified retirement plan, and that's why it falls under certain guidelines from the federal government, stuff like that. So, you know, you can keep, if you have a 401k or in place for your company now, you can keep that in place. You don't have to. So you can have basically dual retirement plans for employees running at the same time, which we left in place. So we left our 401k matching everything the way it was, and now this just lays over the top of it. So, you know, I've seen figures from the convention saying that, you know, an ESOP employee has about, I think it's a third more wealth when they retire than a typical company employee from an average company. So that's, you know, it's a wealth builder for them. I mean, you know, I know Jim's got some people in his company that have you know, now almost 14 years into it. No, 8 years.
We're 7 or 8 years into it.
Yeah. You've got some people that have got some pretty big amounts of stock in this company. I mean, it just grows. As the company grows, those values of those stock, which are revalued every year. Your company goes back through valuation every year, so your stock can be repriced at the appropriate price. So they get to see that over time. We haven't been in it long enough for that. They saw the initial price. This is what they call the strike price. They saw what the stock was worth. They see what they got. Now they're going to start seeing that grow over the next few years, and it should start trending up in the right direction. And, you know, it's one of those things, you look at it in 5 years, 10 years, you may have a nice little nest egg there for retirement. So I think that's the way they have to look at it.
Yeah, before we got on the webinar, Jim was telling a story about a forklift driver at a company, not in the hot tub industry, that ended up with a pretty decent retirement because he worked for an ESOP.
It is like Mark, he's so right. We maintained our 401k plan at the same time because ultimately we've found that we can convert a slightly higher proportion of our payroll dollars, of our total general and administrative expenses to payroll. And so we're in a better position to increase wages, to increase 401k payments, to put discretionary 401k payments in, while still having the stock price go up annually. So we find and improve benefits, employee benefits too. And in this market of very competitive labor, any one of us listening or participating in this webinar need to find ways in which you can attract and retain good employees. And the ESOP, you know, we don't make 100% of our employees don't stay with us, but a much larger proportion does now because they understand the benefits of employee ownership. And it leads to better camaraderie, better chemistry around the company, better relationships by employees with customers. So it has so many other really good longevity characteristics to it from a business standpoint.
We've had another question. Do you have any advice for a company with equal owners converting to an ESOP? All the business owners equally built and worked hard to create this success and would continue to do so. Yeah, you guys both were the sole owners of your company, or more or less the sole owners of your company. So does this look a lot different if you have multiple equal owners involved?
You know, I don't think it looks different. I think it's just like you're selling the business, or you're going to have different percentages paid out to the owners. Um, you know, I think you got to figure out how that makeup's going to look, whether they all sit on the board, or you know how you make up your structure going forward. But I think if you got multiple owners in a business that are looking to ESOP a business, I think there's ways to do it.
I think so too. My son has a partner in his business. They're 50-50 owners, and they're still too early for them to even think about exit planning. But to be able to define what your roles are as partners, and to pay a lot of attention to the partner relationship, is what he has told me has been really important. I've never been involved in a partnership, so I can't say from experience. I just know that you have to be really good with interpersonal interactions with your management team, let alone your business partner.
Yeah.
So
Do you think it's possible that an ESOP could almost be, since it's a little bit more of a defined path than other sales, maybe everyone can come out feeling that they were more equally treated than another type of sale?
I think you're going to have a hard look, and it's, you know, there's going to be you're going to know what the number is when you get to the end of the, you know, negotiations, and it's going to go through enough eyeballs to know that it wasn't just Jim or Mark's feel good number, or you know, I was the senior partner, so I felt like this is what we needed to sell it for, or something like that. I think there's going to be enough participation and enough, you know, the valuation company and the ESOP court, you know, court advisor, and you know, the trustees and their valuation company. There's going to be enough ways to look at it that you know that it was fair for everybody. I would think.
The transactional people, the people who are analyzing your company, the trustee and the trustees valuation people, they have to be able to, and the bank for that matter, they have to know that the people in place are people that they can trust. And so we didn't answer directly one of your earlier questions, Megan, and that is who has to be involved. And so I had my COO and my CFO. I had to bring them into the confidence of this transaction and what I was considering. And then they in turn had to present a lot of the company facts and data to the bankers, to the valuation people. And this was all, of course, confidential and private, but I had to bring people in, you know, and
we did the exact same thing. We did the exact, you know, for me to tackle that by myself, I needed to bring in certain people in the executive team at certain times. By the time the sale was getting ready, all the executive team knew we had a plan. You know, you start doing the planning of the rollout, and how you're going to notify employees, and how you're going to have a meeting and talk about all of it. So I'd say within 3 months of the sale, we had pretty much our whole executive team, including marketing and other people involved, HR, involved in the process to understand how we were going to roll this out, how we were going to execute it. But I would say initially, same thing. My COO and my CFO were heavily involved in helping prepare some of the stuff that needed to be prepared.
Yeah. What are the cons of an ESOP? I mean, I know obviously you guys are both proponents of ESOPs. You successfully converted your companies, but I mean, nothing is perfect. What would some cons be?
Well, there's no cliff. There's no instant retirement, really. And there are some, both of us have friends in the industry who have chosen some other routes to exit, and it's a much quicker, you can find quicker and faster ways to a whole new lifestyle, and different strokes for different folks. And these are really good operators, and they just, you know, so the con is, if you call it a con, for me, I love working, so it's not a con at all. But you do have a longer participation period in the business after the sale transaction than you would in an alternative sale.
So we had another question that kind of ties into this a little bit. How long does it usually take to go through the conversion process?
So when I first talked to my advisor, that was his first question. You know, when do you want to? He asked me two things. What do you want? What value do you want out of the company, and how long do you want it to take? And I told him, I'm not going to tell you a number on the value. I want the numbers to prove out what they should prove out, and then we'll talk about that when we go through the modeling, and we'll hammer all that out. So, and it actually worked out to my favor saying it that way. The second thing was I told him, I gave them my timeline, and they said, look, we can do this as quick as 6 months, but your timeline works a little bit better. So it was about an 8 or 9 month process for me to go through the process. So it can be done rather quickly. I think it really depends on where you're at in your business. And what pieces do you have in place to run the company? Are your financials ready for scrutiny? And where your comfort level is, how much work you want to put in how quickly, because that's probably the con for me. You've got to be prepared to do the homework and do the work, and not just agree to a price with somebody and get a check and walk away. So
something that you had said to me, Mark, when I first talked to you about when you guys became an ESOP, you talk about making sure you have a team in place, but you really need that team in place in order to convert to an ESOP, because you said it took up most of your time for a few months. It wasn't like you could, run the business at a really like operational level and also go through all of the work that it took to convert to an ESOP. Like that really became your job for a while, right?
yeah, and like I said earlier, our plan was how to run the business as an absentee owner. That was how I was structuring Georgia Spot Company. It just so happens, in doing that, I had put the management in place to run the company, to sell the company, if it needed to be sold or needed to be ESOP or whatever route we decided to take. So yeah, you've got to, we should all aspire to that as business owners, to have a company that's well running, and that you're just reviewing stuff and taking care of hard issues, not putting out fires on a day-to-day basis. So I think that's number one.
Yeah. Was that the same for you, Jim? Did that become?
It was a little longer for me because I'm not as good as extracting myself from day-to-day operations as Mark was. And so I was being an active CEO at the same time I was trying to do this. And so it took me a year to ultimately get to the finish line. But it was a planned year, and I knew the deadlines of what had to be done and when, and so did the two key team members on my team. So we got there at the time that I wanted to, but I was 68 or whatever when that happened, and I still had a 3-year employment contract. Mark didn't have that, I don't think, and so, but I was fine with that because I think I got a better banking deal with an employment contract.
Yeah,
and that's why we talked about exit right away. How do you need it in the next few years? Do you need it in the 10 years? Where are you at in your journey in your life?
Yeah, I think that is such a key question that sometimes we don't necessarily look at as closely as we should, is like, what do I actually need this to be for me, for my family, for my life, for my retirement? What do I really want out of my life and out of this company before you start down any succession planning journey? I just think that's a self-evaluation you really need to do.
Yeah, and I would recommend it. Mark did it much earlier than I, and to his credit, I think that's really smart to even start thinking about this. I mean, you define your age, but I did it later than I should have, because I was still really trying to grow the company actively. And Mark did a better job. He was able to get to that kind of a position faster than I was.
So we've got about 5 minutes left, and so if anyone has any more questions, by all means send those over. But Jim and Mark, do you guys have any final thoughts on converting to an ESOP? Maybe just feedback from your employees or from yourselves on what it's meant for your lives or their lives?
I would
Well,
say,
I call up and I say I need my hot tub moved, and they say, how fast? I mean, it's wonderful. This group of people really loves the idea that they're building value in their own company. And so it's nice to be held in high esteem, and not that that was the objective, but that's the result. And so at the board level, I find that it's that I think I still have a lot of interesting advice to offer, and the folks on our team appreciate some of that advice. I'm sure Mark does the same in his. And by the way, I would strongly recommend. Mark and I have been together in a best practices group of peers around the country, and boy, do we ever learn a lot about all facets of operating our business by being in a best practices group. And it will build value in your company, because you'll learn new techniques, whether they're financial or marketing or operational or human resource, whatever. So that's another. I think that's an important part of succession planning, Megan.
Yeah, I would say that, just like Jim, I mean, I've become pretty passionate about this topic because it's so unique. It's a great opportunity. The people that are excited about wanting to figure out an exit strategy, everybody should be trying to figure it out. Whether you're 50 years old, 60 years old, 70 years old, you should be trying to figure out your exit strategy, whether you execute it in the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, but you got to have a plan. And I see so many business owners wait till later in life and they go, okay, I'm ready to step off the cliff and get out of this. How do I do it? And, I wasn't particularly ready to sell my business, but at a certain point I said, this is what I need to do, because this is where I'm at. And just happened to put everything in place. But I think, just like Jim, I mean, anybody that needs a one-on-one discussion or wants to talk about something or figure it out, it's not the best route for everybody. I'm going to say that up front. It's not. But it's a great opportunity that I think hasn't existed in our industry since Jim did it. And I think Jim sort of got out there in front of it and was very passionate about it, and turned on myself and some others in the industry to go down this path. And I think it's a great opportunity for everybody, because we've all built some companies that have some great people in it, and we just would love to figure out how to pass that torch to them a little bit.
Yeah.
And they win. The wonderful part about this is Mark and I have been winners of a sort, and we've defined what winning was for us, but our employees were winners and our customers were winners. So our employee team didn't change. In many business transactions, there's new management that comes in, or there's a new group of players, and so customers have to get used to new people. And the fact that we've maintained the same employees interacting with customers, I think, is a huge competitive advantage to us.
I would agree.
Yeah. We did have one more question come in before we finish up here. So who decides, or how is it decided, the percentage of stock that is transferred to each employee? Or does each ESOP get to decide that criteria themselves?
Megan, you wanted to dive into the weeds.
I know. No, I didn't ask this question. This is for the audience.
I'll try to make it short and sweet. You're going to come up with a stock option plan. It's in the negotiation. It's in the sale. It happens before the sale. It sort of defines, how much stock is offered up, when it's issued, for how long, if you're going to do it over a short period of time or 25 or 30 years. So all that's defined in the plan. And then once you close the deal, you have another company come in called a third-party administrator who helps you execute that plan and put together how much stock each employee gets based on their wages, and then how that looks over. Like I said, it's a lot of weeds here, Megan, because we back funded our plan a year back. So when we actually closed our deal, our ESOP had already been active for a year and a half. So that was a very unique way to do it because we were able to back fund our plan to get it started. So a lot of people from day one already had a because the first year is not a vestable year, already had a half a year ready to invest. And by the time they finished out the rest of that half a year, they were 20% for our case, they were 20% invested in the plan. So very unique in that sense, but it's very weedy. It's a lot of things you're going to lean on your advisor to walk you through and give you the options along with your attorney, the ESOP attorney. All those things get talked about, discussed, and figured out. And they walk you through the process.
Okay.
Generally speaking, most folks choose to have stock distributed proportionate. If you take your total payroll, every person has their own earnings or a percentage of that total payroll, and that often becomes the percentage in every year for how much of the stock is given to each person. There are other ways to handle key people too. Maybe in a future conversation, Megan, we can talk about, but there are ways for you to incentivize the really key people in your company. Let's save that for another time.
No, that's great. Thank you. So we are having another one of these on May 15th. I believe Jim and Mark are both going to join us again, but we will also be joined by Phil Hayes, who was Mark's ESOP advisor. And so he may even have more insight into some of these questions and some of these other ways that you can do things. But we'll get more into the next one. We'll get a lot more into the weeds of the process of converting to an ESOP. But thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
People in the audience who wanted to make sure that you got a thank you for doing this and for all of your advice and sharing your experiences. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.